The magnolia trees had witnessed many burials in Charleston's oldest cemetery, but they had never witnessed a resurrection. 200 mourners stood in autumn sunlight, dressed in black, faces solemn beneath a white canvas tent. At the center rested a casket of polished mahogany, lid open, revealing Eleanor Whitmore, 62 years old. Silver hair perfectly arranged, hands folded across her chest. Her skin held the waxy pallor of death. Cotton wool filled her nostrils. Richard Caldwell stood beside his wife's body, dabbing his eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. His shoulders trembled with what appeared to be grief. The pastor cleared his throat. 2 gravediggers stepped forward, hands reaching for the ropes. Then a voice tore through the silence like thunder. "Stop! Don't lower that casket!" Every head turned. Through the magnolia branches came a man running wild beard, tattered army coat, broken glasses held together with tape. Isaiah Thompson, homeless for 12 years, stopped at the casket's edge, chest heaving. "She's not dead," he said, "and I can prove it." Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months before that autumn funeral, Eleanor Whitmore sat in her study on the 3rd floor of her Charleston mansion, watching the sun set over the harbor. At 62, she was still beautiful, silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, blue eyes that missed nothing, hands that had signed billion-dollar contracts now wrapped around a cup of chamomile tea. She was the 3rd generation to run Whitmore Pharmaceuticals, a company her grandfather had built from nothing. Under her leadership, it had become one of the most respected names in medicine. But the house echoed with loneliness. Her first husband, Robert, had died of cancer 10 years ago. They'd never had children, her greatest sorrow, the one thing money couldn't buy. The rooms that should have been filled with laughter and life were silent museums of wealth. Eleanor had made a difference in other ways. She'd built free clinics in the poorest neighborhoods of Charleston, places where people could get care regardless of the color of their skin or the emptiness of their wallets. She'd funded scholarships for hundreds of students who'd never dreamed of college. The city loved her for it, but love at a distance. She'd learned was still loneliness. 5 years ago, she'd met Richard Caldwell at a corporate law conference. He was 43 then, handsome in an understated way, with gray-streaked hair and eyes that seemed to truly see her. He'd made her laugh. More importantly, he'd made her feel less alone. Their courtship had been swift, 6 months from meeting to wedding. Margaret, Eleanor's 80-year-old aunt and only living relative, had whispered warnings. "He looks at you like a store window, not like a woman," she'd said. Eleanor had dismissed it as overprotectiveness. Richard had integrated himself into her life seamlessly. He became chief financial officer at Whitmore Pharmaceuticals, proved himself competent if not brilliant. Every evening, he brought her tea and her study chamomile with honey, just the way she liked it. He'd kiss her forehead and say, "Sweet dreams, my love." It had become their ritual, their moment of connection in busy lives. What Eleanor didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Richard's devotion was a performance, perfected over years of practice. His father had hanged himself in their garage when Richard was 16, driven to suicide by bankruptcy and shame. Young Richard had found the body. That trauma had calcified into an obsession: never be poor, never be powerless, never be nothing. Meanwhile, across Charleston. Isaiah Thompson slept under the Cooper River Bridge. He'd been there for 12 years, ever since his world had shattered. Once, he'd been somebody, an aerospace engineer at NASA, MIT graduate, a man who'd helped design propulsion systems for spacecraft. But that life had ended the night a drunk driver ran a red light and killed his wife Sarah and their 8-year-old daughter Grace. The driver had been Richard Caldwell, 23 years old and terrified, son of a state senator who'd hired the best lawyers money could buy. Isaiah had sat in that courtroom, watching justice fail. 6-month sentence, out in 3. Something in Isaiah had broken that day. He'd lost his job, his home, his will to live. The bridge became his refuge, his purgatory, his reminder that the world didn't care about men like him. But he still had his mind, and he still visited the Charleston Public Library every day, reading books on chemistry, engineering, toxicology, holding on to the man he used to be. He had no idea that soon those books would save a life, and that the life he saved would belong to the wife of the man who'd destroyed him. Eleanor found the receipt by accident. She'd been taking Richard's suit jacket to the dry cleaner when a slip of paper fell from the inner pocket. At first, she thought it was a restaurant bill or parking stub, but the printed text made her blood run cold, a web address she didn't recognize, followed by a search query that seemed to burn into her retinas. TTX pharmaceutical grade, 50 milliliters. Eleanor had learned enough chemistry over 40 years running a pharmaceutical company to know what TTX meant. Tetrodotoxin, a neurotoxin found in puffer fish, blue-ringed octopuses, certain newts. In the right dose, it could paralyze every muscle in the human body while leaving the mind fully conscious. In a slightly higher dose, it could kill. Why would her husband be researching poison? She said nothing that evening when Richard brought her tea. She watched his face as he handed her the delicate china cup chamomile with honey, their nightly ritual. His smile was warm, his kiss on her forehead gentle. But for the first time in 5 years, Eleanor looked past the performance and saw something else in his eyes, something cold, something calculating. Her hands trembled as she raised the cup to her lips. Within 2 days, she'd hired a private investigator. Detective Maria Chen was discreet, efficient, and ruthless. The evidence she compiled over the next 4 months was damning. Bank transfers to untraceable accounts, dark web forum posts under an anonymous handle, asking detailed questions about TTX dosage, detection, and how to avoid autopsy. Downloads of Eleanor's will, the one that left everything to Richard if she died within 5 years of their marriage. Richard had been planning this for at least 6 months. "You need to go to the police," Maria said, spreading the evidence across Eleanor's desk. "This is attempted murder, conspiracy. We have enough to arrest him." Eleanor shook her head. "Richard's a lawyer." "A brilliant one. He'll claim the evidence is circumstantial. He'll say I'm a paranoid old woman, mentally unstable, imagining threats. He'll turn this around on me." "Then what do you want to do?" Eleanor's answer shocked even herself. "I want to switch his poison with a modified dose. Something that will slow my heart but not stop it. I'll let him think he's succeeded. Let him reveal himself completely. Only then will the truth be undeniable." Maria stared at her. "That's insane." You could die. I'm going to die anyway if I do nothing, Eleanor said quietly. At least this way. I control how it happens, and I'll finally know something I've wondered my whole life. What's that? Eleanor looked out the window at the Charleston harbor, golden in the fading light. Whether anyone would speak for me when I can't speak for myself, when I'm powerless, when I have no voice, will anyone care enough to see the truth? 2 weeks later, Richard brought her tea. He was especially attentive that evening, massaging her shoulders, asking about her day. They discussed the company, expansion plans, the future. When he mentioned succession planning, his eagerness was barely concealed. "We have time for that," Eleanor said, sipping the tea. It tasted the same as always, chamomile, honey, a faint bitterness she'd never noticed before, or perhaps had always been there. 20 minutes later, her fingers went numb. She tried to stand. The room tilted. She felt Richard's arms catch her as she fell, heard his voice shouting her name with perfect panic. But even as darkness closed in, even as her lungs forgot how to breathe, she remained aware, conscious, trapped. She felt him check her pulse, heard him whisper, so softly only she could hear, "Forgive me, but I won't be poor again." Then the ambulance came, and Eleanor watched the ceiling tiles pass above her, unable to move, unable to scream, unable to tell anyone that she was still alive. At the hospital, Dr. Marcus Ashford, her trusted physician for 15 years, examined her lifeless body. Richard pulled him aside. Eleanor couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw Marcus's face go pale. When he returned, his hands shook as he filled out the death certificate. Time of death, 10:47 p.m. Cause cardiac arrest. Natural causes. Inside her frozen body, Eleanor screamed silently, "Marcus, no, please." But no sound came. She was dead to the world, and in 48 hours, they would bury her. Isaiah Thompson had lived under the Cooper River Bridge for 12 years, but he'd never stopped being an engineer. Every night, he organized his few possessions with mathematical precision, the tattered sleeping bag folded just so, the cardboard sheets arranged to block wind from the northeast, his brother Elijah's army coat draped within arm's reach. The coat still smelled faintly of Vietnam and cigarettes, though Elijah had been dead for 30 years. Tonight, rain drummed against the concrete above. Isaiah sat cross-legged on his cardboard, reading by flashlight. The book was from the Charleston Public Library, checked out under the guest pass they gave to homeless patrons, Advanced Toxicology in Modern Medicine. Most people thought he was crazy. Reading chemistry texts under a bridge. Maybe he was. But the books reminded him of who he used to be. Before the accident, before the trial, before the world had dismissed him as another invisible black man with nothing left to lose. A photograph slipped from between the pages, worn soft at the edges from 15 years of handling. Sarah smiled up at him, her arm around 8-year-old Grace. The girl wore pigtails and a NASA t-shirt 3 sizes too big, stolen from her father's dresser. Astronaut Daddy, she'd called him. Isaiah touched their faces with a fingertip. "I miss you, baby girl," he whispered to the rain. Then, as he did every night, he sang softly, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." His voice cracked on the chorus. Some people who passed under the bridge thought he was crazy for singing to ghosts. But the song was all he had left of them. At 11:30 p.m., a black Mercedes pulled up near the bridge. Isaiah recognized it. He'd seen it before in the library parking lot, always perfectly polished, out of place in the neighborhood. The engine idled. A window cracked open, just enough for phone signal. Isaiah wasn't trying to eavesdrop. But sound carried strangely under the bridge, and the man's voice was clear, sharp with satisfaction. Yes, it worked perfectly. The TTX dose I gave her was exactly right. Isaiah's hand froze on his book. TTX. He'd just been reading about tetrodotoxin, the pufferfish poison that paralyzed victims while leaving them conscious. What were the odds? And the doctor signed. Another voice, tinny through speakerphone. Doctor. Ashford had no choice. The man in the Mercedes said. I reminded him about the malpractice case from 2015. The one where his patient died because he was drunk on duty. Eleanor Whitmore helped him cover it up, paid the family quietly, made it all go away. Ashford knows if I expose that, he loses everything. His career, his freedom, his reputation. Isaiah's heart hammered. He barely breathed, terrified any sound would alert the man to his presence. When's the funeral? The voice on the phone asked. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., fast and clean, no autopsy. The death certificate says cardiac arrest, natural causes. By the time anyone questions it, she'll be 6 feet under. You're certain she's dead? The man laughed, a sound without warmth. She's in cold storage at Magnolia Funeral Home right now. But here's the beautiful part, TTX doesn't actually kill immediately. It mimics death so perfectly even doctors can't tell the difference. Her heart rate drops to almost nothing. Her breathing becomes undetectable. But technically, he paused. She might still be barely alive. Doesn't matter, though. 48 hours in a sealed casket with no oxygen. She'll be dead for real soon enough. Isaiah's stomach turned. And the will? Everything transfers to me. The company, the mansion, the foundation. All of it. First thing I'll do is shut down those ridiculous free clinics. Money drains. Every one of them. By Sunday, I'll be the wealthiest widower in Charleston. To Richard Caldwell, the voice on the phone said, the man who finally got what he deserved. What I earned, Richard corrected. I earned this. 5 years of playing the devoted husband to a lonely old woman, worth every minute. The Mercedes drove away, red taillights disappearing into rain. Isaiah sat in the darkness, shaking. His mind raced through what he'd just heard. A woman, Eleanor Whitmore, was being murdered. Was already dead, but maybe not actually dead. Would be buried alive tomorrow. He pulled out the photograph of Sarah and Grace. The drunk driver who'd killed them had been rich, connected, protected by expensive lawyers. Isaiah had sat silent in that courtroom, too broken to fight. Justice had failed because he'd been too weak to demand it. Not this time. He looked down at the toxicology book in his lap, open to a chapter on TTX poisoning. There was a section on antidotes, calcium-based compounds that could counteract the paralysis if administered quickly enough. Isaiah had access to the library's community science lab. They let homeless people use it for job training programs. He had the knowledge. He had the resources. He had less than 14 hours. His hands stopped shaking. For the first time in 12 years, Isaiah Thompson had a purpose. "Sarah," he whispered to the photograph. "Grace, I couldn't save you. I couldn't get justice for you, but maybe I can save her." He tucked the photo into his brother's coat, closed the book, and stood. The rain had stopped. Dawn was coming. And tomorrow, at Magnolia Grove Cemetery, he would do what he should have done 15 years ago. He would speak up. Darkness, complete and absolute. Eleanor Whitmore had been trapped in her own body for 48 hours. And the darkness was the worst part. Not the cold satin pressed against her cheek. Not the cloying smell of roses and formaldehyde. Not even the crushing weight of paralysis. It was the darkness, thick, suffocating, infinite. She could hear everything. Muffled voices through the casket lid. Footsteps. The low rumble of the hearse engine vibrating through mahogany. She'd tried everything to move, screamed commands at her fingers, her toes, her eyelids. Nothing responded. Her body had become a prison, and she was the sole inmate. The modified dose of tetrodotoxin should have worn off by now. That's what the research had said. 12 to 24 hours for low doses. But she'd miscalculated something, the concentration, the metabolism rate, her own body chemistry. The paralysis held fast. Now she felt movement, the casket being lifted, carried, footsteps crunching on gravel. Fresh air leaked in. Briefly she could smell it, magnolia blossoms and autumn grass, before the lid muted everything again. They were taking her to the grave. Terror clawed at her frozen lungs. She tried to pray, though she'd never been religious. Not to God, but to Robert, her first husband, dead 10 years now. If you're watching, if there's anything beyond this, send help, please. Don't let me die like this. The casket settled onto something, the stand above the grave. She guessed. Through the wood. She heard the pastor's voice, distant and solemn, beginning the service. This was real. They were going to bury her. And unlike her careful plan, unlike her desperate gamble for truth, no one had noticed. No one had spoken up. She would die alone, conscious, 6 feet underground. Her last thought before despair took her completely. I was wrong. No one cares enough to see. 8 miles away, Isaiah Thompson was walking. He'd started at dawn, his brother's army coat wrapped tight against the morning chill, a small canvas bag slung over his shoulder. Inside the bag, a glass vial he'd spent all night preparing in the library's community lab, an eyedropper, a photocopy of the toxicology textbook page on TTX antidotes, and the photograph of Sarah and Grace. His feet ached. At 58, after 12 years of malnutrition and sleeping on concrete, his body wasn't what it had been. But he walked steadily, purpose driving each step. People on the sidewalk gave him wide berth, the homeless man with wild beard and broken glasses, muttering to himself as he walked. If they'd listened closer, they would have heard him rehearsing what he'd say. She's not dead. She's been poisoned. Her name is Eleanor Whitmore, and she's still alive. Would anyone listen? Would they even let him near the cemetery? He was a black man in a city that had built its wealth on the backs of enslaved people. A homeless man in a world that preferred to pretend people like him didn't exist. But he kept walking. At a bus stop, an elderly black woman in church clothes watched him approach. Something in his face must have shown his desperation because she reached into her purse. "Son," she said gently, "you look like you're on a mission." Isaiah stopped, surprised to be addressed as human rather than obstacle. "Yes, ma'am. I'm trying to save someone's life." She pressed a $5 bill into his hand. "Then Godspeed." He used the money for bus fare for the final 2 miles and to buy a small bottle of rubbing alcohol from a pharmacy to sterilize the dropper if he got the chance to use it. The glass vial in his bag contained his best attempt at an antidote calcium gluconate mixed with potassium chloride, proportions calculated from memory and hope. It might work. It might do nothing. It might kill her faster. But doing nothing guaranteed her death. And Isaiah was done with doing nothing. At Magnolia Grove Cemetery, 200 people gathered under white tents that snapped in the breeze. Margaret Whitmore, 85 and sharp-eyed, sat in the front row, watching her niece's husband with suspicion that had calcified into certainty. Something was wrong. Everything about this funeral felt rushed, performative, false. She studied Richard Caldwell as he stood beside the casket, dabbing his eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. His grief was perfect shoulders trembling at precisely the right moments, voice cracking when he spoke Eleanor's name. Too perfect. Margaret had lived long enough to know the difference between real sorrow and rehearsed emotion. 5 years ago, at Eleanor's wedding, Margaret had whispered a warning, "He looks at you like a storefront window, not with love, but with wanting." Eleanor had dismissed it as an old woman's paranoia. Now Eleanor was dead at 62, and Margaret's paranoia had become vindication she'd never wanted. 3 rows back. Dr. Marcus Ashford sat sweating despite the cool autumn air. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He clutched his medical bag like a lifeline, feeling the weight of the death certificate inside the one he'd signed 48 hours ago, the one that declared Eleanor dead of cardiac arrest when he'd barely checked her vital signs. When Richard Caldwell had stood inches away, watching, waiting. Marcus had saved his career 15 years ago by covering up a mistake, a patient who died because he'd been drunk on duty. Eleanor had quietly paid the family, made it disappear, saved him from prison and disgrace, and this was how he'd repaid her. By signing her death warrant when Richard threatened to expose the truth. The guilt was eating him alive. But what could he do now? She was dead. The certificate was signed. Speaking up would destroy him and change nothing. Richard stood at the casket's head, his internal monologue a million miles from his tearful expression. Almost over. Just get through this service. Once she's underground, I'm free. The company is mine. The money is mine. Everything Dad lost. Everything he died for. I'll have it all. He thought of his father's body swinging from the garage rafters, the suicide note that said simply, "I can't live poor." Richard had been 16, had found him after school. That image had driven every decision since the ruthless climb through law school, the calculated courtship of Eleanor, the patient 5-year wait for his inheritance. He touched the casket gently, a gesture the mourners would see as love. "You would have given it to me eventually," he thought. "But I couldn't wait. Time is money. Eleanor, You taught me that." In the crowd, others mourned genuinely. A middle-aged black woman whispered to her friend, "Mrs. Whitmore paid for my son's leukemia treatment. We'd have lost him without her." An elderly white man wiped his eyes. "She gave my wife a job after her stroke, when no one else would." A young Latina woman held her baby close. "That free clinic she built saved my daughter's life." Eleanor Whitmore had touched hundreds of lives, especially those the world forgot. Now she was leaving them. Pastor Williams, 65 and dignified, opened his Bible. "We are gathered here in the sight of God and this company to remember Eleanor Catherine Whitmore, taken from us too soon." Margaret suddenly stood. "Wait." The pastor paused. Richard's jaw tightened. "Can I say something?" Margaret's voice carried across the cemetery. Richard stepped forward quickly. "Aunt Margaret, perhaps after the service—" "No, now." She walked to the casket, placed a weathered hand on it. "Eleanor, my dear girl, I'm so sorry I didn't protect you." She turned to face the crowd, her 85 years of life giving her words weight. "Doesn't anyone else find it strange how quickly this funeral was arranged? Eleanor collapsed 2 nights ago. We're burying her today. No wake, no viewing period. Just immediate burial." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Richard's voice hardened. "Aunt Margaret, grief can make us—" "I'm not grieving yet." Margaret cut him off. "Because I don't believe she's gone. Not like this. Not so fast." She pointed at Richard. "And I don't believe your tears." "Young man, I've never believed them." Gasps. Phones lifted, starting to record. Richard's mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of fury in his eyes. "That's offensive. That's cruel. Pastor, please continue. Guards, escort Mrs. Whitmore back to her seat." 2 funeral home attendants stepped forward, gently but firmly taking Margaret's arms. "Listen to me," she shouted as they pulled her away. "Something is wrong. Don't bury her yet." But the pastor, uncomfortable and uncertain, nodded to the gravediggers. They stepped forward, gripped the ropes attached to the casket. They began to lower. The casket descended. 6 inches, 1 foot. Margaret struggled against the men holding her. "Please, I'm begging you." The grave, dark, rectangular, freshly dug, swallowed the casket inch by inch. 2 feet down now. 3. Then, from the tree line, came the sound of running feet on gravel, and a voice, desperate and commanding, "Stop, stop, right now." Everyone turned. Through the magnolia trees, coattails flying, came Isaiah Thompson. The crowd parted like water around a stone as Isaiah Thompson ran through the cemetery, his brother's tattered army coat flapping behind him, broken glasses sliding down his sweat-slicked nose. 200 mourners in black turned as one, their faces registering shock, confusion, then disgust as they saw who had interrupted the sacred moment. A homeless man, wild-bearded, desperate-eyed, running toward them like a madman. Isaiah stopped at the edge of the open grave where Eleanor Whitmore's mahogany casket hung suspended on ropes, already 3 feet down into darkness. His chest heaved with exertion, sweat dripped from his temples, but his voice, when it came, carried the authority of a man who'd once helped send rockets into space. "That woman is not dead. She's been poisoned with tetrodotoxin. Please, I'm begging you, don't bury her." The silence lasted only a heartbeat. Then chaos erupted. "Who the hell is that?" a man in an expensive suit demanded. "Homeless guy," someone else said with disgust. "Probably drunk." "Get security." "This is disrespectful." Phones lifted throughout the crowd like a forest of glowing rectangles. Whatever was happening, everyone wanted it recorded. Within hours, this moment would be uploaded, shared, going viral across a nation hungry for spectacle. Richard Caldwell stepped forward smoothly, his face arranged in perfect, bewildered grief. He'd practiced this expression, perfected it over 5 years of marriage. Concern, compassion, gentle authority. "Sir, I understand you may be confused or upset, but this is a private funeral. My wife has passed away. We're here to lay her to rest with dignity. Security. Please escort this man." "My name is Isaiah Thompson." Isaiah's voice cut through Richard's polished tones like a blade. "I'm not confused, and I'm not leaving. I heard you, Mr. Caldwell, 2 nights ago, under the Cooper River Bridge where I sleep." Richard's face, that carefully constructed mask, flickered, just for a second. But Isaiah saw it. So did Margaret, standing near the casket, her 85-year-old eyes suddenly sharp with understanding. Isaiah pressed forward, knowing he had seconds before security dragged him away. "I heard you on the phone. You said the TTX worked perfectly. You said Dr. Ashford signed the death certificate because you blackmailed him with something from 2015. You said you'd bury her fast, before anyone could question it." The cemetery erupted again. Gasps, screams. Someone dropped their phone. Margaret broke free from the funeral attendants who'd been restraining her and rushed toward Isaiah. "I knew it," she shouted, her voice cracking with vindication and fury. "I knew something was wrong." 2 security guards reached Isaiah, grabbed his arms. He didn't resist, but he kept talking, his voice rising above the chaos. "She's not dead. The poison tetrodotoxin from pufferfish, it mimics death, slows the heart to almost nothing, makes breathing invisible, but the brain stays alive. She's conscious, trapped, and if you bury her now, she'll suffocate in that box, aware of everything." Richard recovered quickly, his lawyer's training kicking in. He turned to the crowd, his voice wounded, dignified. "This man is clearly disturbed, making wild accusations against a grieving widower. He's homeless, probably suffering from mental illness, substance abuse. Guards, remove him immediately because I'm black." Isaiah's question stopped everyone cold. The guard's hands loosened slightly on his arms. "Because I'm poor. Because I sleep under a bridge instead of in a mansion." He looked at Richard directly, and something in his dark eyes made several people in the crowd step back instinctively. This was not a crazy man. This was someone who'd been broken but not destroyed. "I was an aerospace engineer at NASA for 15 years, Isaiah said, his voice steady now, almost conversational. "MIT graduate, class of 1989. I worked on propulsion systems for the space shuttle program. I lost everything when a drunk driver killed my wife and daughter 15 years ago. I lost my home, my career, my will to live. But I didn't lose my mind, Mr. Caldwell, and I didn't lose my knowledge." He turned to the crowd. "Tetrodotoxin blocks sodium channels in nerve cells. in precise doses. It can slow vital signs to the point where even trained doctors can't detect life. The victim appears dead cold. Still, no detectable pulse. But they're aware, conscious, experiencing everything. It's been documented in medical literature for decades. A woman pushed through the crowd, 40s, professional, wearing a doctor's white coat under her black jacket. "He's right. I'm Dr. Lisa Chen, toxicologist at the Medical University of South Carolina." TTX poisoning creates a state called apparent death. Victims have been mistakenly declared dead, even buried, while still technically alive. Dr. Marcus Ashford, still seated 3 rows back, stood abruptly. His face had gone gray. "This is impossible. I examined Mrs. Whitmore myself. I checked for pulse, respiration, pupil response." "For how long?" Isaiah asked gently. "Did you use an electrocardiogram? Did you check for more than 30 seconds? Or was someone standing over you watching, making sure you signed the death certificate quickly?" Dr. Ashford's mouth worked silently. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool autumn air. Richard's voice hardened, losing its sympathetic edge. "This is absurd, even if this ridiculous theory had any merit. We have no way to verify it. The respectful thing, the right thing is to complete the service and let my wife rest in peace. Pastor Williams, please continue. Lower the casket." "No." Margaret's voice rang with an authority that came from 8 decades of not tolerating nonsense. "I am Eleanor Whitmore's legal next of kin. I hold medical power of attorney, a fact I made sure to maintain. Richard, despite your repeated requests that I revoke it, I authorize stopping this burial immediately." Richard's jaw clenched hard enough that the muscle jumped. "Aunt Margaret, you're not thinking clearly. Grief has—" "Don't you dare patronize me, young man." Margaret's eyes blazed. "I've buried a husband, a brother, both my parents, and 3 close friends. I know grief. This isn't grief I'm feeling. This is certainty. Something about this entire situation is wrong, and I won't let Eleanor be put in the ground until I'm satisfied she's truly gone." She pointed at Isaiah. "This man walked 8 miles to get here. He's risking being arrested, beaten, dismissed as crazy. Why would he do that unless he believed, truly believed, that Eleanor is alive?" Isaiah reached into his canvas bag with trembling hands. He pulled out a small glass vial filled with clear liquid, an eyedropper, and a photocopied page from a medical textbook. "This is a calcium-based antidote for tetrodotoxin poisoning. If I'm wrong, nothing will happen. If I'm right, it could save her life. But we need to act now. She's been without proper oxygen for 48 hours. Richard lunged forward. "You will not put some homeless man's street drugs into my wife's body." 3 men from the crowd moved faster, blocking Richard's path. The one in front, a black man in his 50s, with the bearing of someone who'd seen combat, grabbed Richard's arm firmly. "Seems to me, Mr. Caldwell, you're awfully determined to keep her buried. If you've got nothing to hide, what's the harm in checking?" The crowd's murmuring grew louder, splitting into factions. Some demanded Isaiah be removed. Others insisted he be allowed to try. Phones continued recording everything. This moment would be dissected frame by frame, analyzed by millions. Dr. Chen stepped forward, took the vial from Isaiah, held it up to the light. Her expression shifted from skepticism to surprise. These proportions are correct. This is legitimate pharmacology. Where did you learn to compound this? Charleston Public Library has a community science lab, Isaiah said. They let homeless people use it for job training. I spent all last night calculating doses, mixing compounds. I'm a chemical engineer by training. I remembered enough. Dr. Chen looked at Margaret. Ma'am, this could work. But I need you to understand there are risks. If her heart is too weak, if her brain has been oxygen deprived too long, this might not be enough. Or it might cause complications we can't predict. Margaret's voice didn't waver. And if we bury her right now, what are the risks of that? If Mr. Thompson is right, she suffocates to death within hours, conscious the entire time. Then we try. Margaret turned to the funeral director. Bring the casket up. Now! Richard tried once more, his voice rising to a shout. This is desecration. This is illegal. I'm her husband. I have the right to. You have the right to remain silent, someone in the crowd called out. Nervous laughter rippled through the mourners, breaking some of the tension. The funeral director looked at his two assistants, then at Margaret, then at the sea of phone cameras recording every moment. Whatever he decided here would follow him forever. He made his choice. Pull her up, he told the gravediggers. The ropes creaked. The casket began to rise from the dark opening, 3 feet, 2 feet, emerging back into autumn sunlight. When it reached ground level, 4 men lifted it carefully, reverently, and placed it back on the stand above the grave. No one spoke. 200 people held their collective breath. The funeral director's hands shook as he reached for the latch. The lock clicked. The lid rose with a long, mournful creak of hinges that needed oil. Eleanor Whitmore lay inside, arranged exactly as she'd been for 2 days. Silver hair perfectly styled, blue dress pressed and elegant, hands folded peacefully across her chest, skin the color of old candles, with faint blue tinging around her lips and fingernails, cotton wool tucked into both nostrils. She looked serene. She looked dead. "Oh, God," someone whispered. "She really is gone. This is sick." Isaiah stepped forward, his legs shaking but his purpose clear. "May I?" Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her weathered face. Isaiah leaned over the casket. His calloused hands that had once calibrated million-dollar instruments gently removed the cotton from Eleanor's nostrils. He lowered his ear close to her mouth, his beard brushing her cold cheek. He waited. 10 seconds. 20. The crowd leaned in with him, as if collectively holding breath could transfer life. Isaiah's eyes widened. He grabbed Margaret's hand, placed it near Eleanor's mouth. "There. Feel it. Very faint. But there." Margaret's gasp was audible throughout the cemetery. "It's warm. Her breath. Oh, merciful God. Her breath is warm." Dr. Chen pushed through with a stethoscope already around her neck. She pressed the cold metal to Eleanor's chest, listened with the intensity of someone whose entire understanding of reality was being challenged. 30 seconds passed. 45. When she looked up, her face was pale. Heartbeat. Extremely bradycardic, maybe 3 beats per minute. But it's there. She's alive. The cemetery exploded into chaos. Screams of shock. Prayers shouted to heaven. Someone fainted dead away. Phones captured every second of the impossible, made real, within an hour. Woman rises from dead would trend worldwide. Doctor. Ashford collapsed to his knees in the grass, sobbing like a child. What have I done? Oh, God, what have I done? Richard stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to name shock, horror, rage, calculation, despair. Then his hand moved inside his jacket. Isaiah saw it first. He's got something. Richard pulled out a syringe filled with clear liquid. His eyes were wild, all pretense of sanity gone. "She was supposed to stay down," he screamed. "The company is mine. I earned it. I won't go back to being nothing." He lunged toward Eleanor with the needle raised. Isaiah threw himself between them without thought. The needle plunged into his shoulder instead. He grunted with pain but didn't move, his body a shield over Eleanor's. 3 men tackled Richard to the ground. The syringe clattered away, rolling across marble until someone's foot stopped it. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Dr. Chen and Margaret worked quickly. Dr. Chen filled the eyedropper with Isaiah's antidote, her hands steady despite the chaos. "Mrs. Whitmore, if you can hear me, we're going to help you now. Hold on." She tilted Eleanor's head back, placed 3 drops carefully under her tongue. 1, 2, 3. The crowd pressed closer, a living wall of witnesses. "Count," someone said. "Count out loud. 1, 2, 3. Isaiah, still standing despite the poison now coursing through his own veins, whispered prayers to a God he'd stopped believing in. "Please, let this work. Don't let me be too late." 4, 5, 6. Nothing. Eleanor remained still as marble. 7, 8. Richard, pinned to the ground, gave a broken, triumphant laugh. "You see, she's dead. My wife is dead. You're all witnesses." Eleanor coughed. Faint, barely audible, but her chest convulsed with it. "Again, Dr. Chen urged. Come on." Another cough. Stronger. Eleanor's fingers twitched. Her chest began to rise and fall with visible effort. "Oxygen," Dr. Chen shouted. "Someone get oxygen." Paramedics who'd just arrived ran back to their ambulance. Eleanor's eyelids fluttered. Another cough racked her body. Her lips moved, trying desperately to form words. "That's it," Margaret sobbed, gripping her niece's hand. "Come back to us. Come back." Eleanor's eyes opened blue, confused, terrified, alive. She saw sky, trees, faces, so many faces, the oxygen mask descending toward her. She tried to move her hand, succeeded weakly. Her fingers found Margaret's. "Aunt. Margaret. Yes. Baby. Yes. You're safe. You're alive." Eleanor's gaze shifted, found Isaiah standing above her, this stranger with kind eyes and a wild beard. "You—" Her voice was a broken whisper. "Who?" Isaiah swayed slightly, the poison in his shoulder beginning to take effect. But he smiled. "Just someone who couldn't stay silent, ma'am." Eleanor's tears came then, rolling down her temples into her silver hair. "Thank you." Then her eyes found Richard, still pinned to the ground by 3 men, his perfect mask shattered into pieces beyond repair. "Richard." Her voice grew stronger with fury and hurt and terrible understanding. "Why?" And Richard Caldwell, who'd spent 5 years building a lie, who'd poisoned his wife and planned to bury her alive for money and power and the desperate fear of being poor, looked at the woman he'd tried to murder and found he had no answer that didn't condemn him utterly. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I couldn't be nothing again." Police officers swarmed into the cemetery then, taking control of the scene. Paramedics rushed Eleanor toward the ambulance. Dr. Chen insisted on checking Isaiah. The needle Richard had used on him contained the same poison. A higher concentration meant to ensure Eleanor never woke. But as they loaded both victims into ambulances, as police read Richard his rights and handcuffed Dr. Ashford alongside him, as 200 witnesses stood in stunned silence among the magnolia trees, one truth crystallized in every mind. They had witnessed the impossible. Death had come to Magnolia Grove Cemetery that autumn day, but so had resurrection. And the voice that had stopped the burial, that had called a woman back from the edge of the grave, belonged to the man everyone had tried to ignore. The homeless man. The invisible man. The man who'd refused to stay silent when silence would have been easier. Isaiah Thompson had saved Eleanor Whitmore's life, and in doing so, had saved his own. Charleston Medical Center's intensive care unit hummed with the steady beep of monitors. Eleanor Whitmore lay propped against white pillows, an IV drip feeding her depleted body, oxygen tubes in her nostrils. She looked fragile, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her face still pale, but her blue eyes burned with fierce clarity. Detective Sarah Morrison sat beside the bed, notebook open, recording device on the side table. Margaret held Eleanor's hand, refusing to leave her niece's side even for a moment. "Mrs. Whitmore," Detective Morrison said gently, "I need to understand what happened. Walk me through everything." Eleanor took a slow breath through the oxygen tubes. "I found a receipt 6 months ago, dark web purchase, tetrodotoxin. Richard had researched how to poison me. Why didn't you come to the police?" Eleanor's laugh was bitter, exhausted. "Because Richard is a brilliant lawyer. He would have claimed I was paranoid, mentally unstable, a bitter wife imagining threats. Without concrete proof, it would have been his word against mine. And his word carries more weight." Margaret squeezed her hand. "So you did something insane instead." "I hired a private investigator, gathered evidence, but I knew it wouldn't be enough, not until Richard actually tried to kill me and revealed himself completely." Eleanor's voice grew stronger. "So I switched his tetrodotoxin with a modified dose. Lower concentration, just enough to slow my heart, not stop it. I knew he'd use it in my nightly tea. I gambled that someone would notice something wrong before they buried me." Detective Morrison's pen stopped moving. "You intentionally poisoned yourself." I intentionally controlled how I'd be poisoned. Richard was going to do it anyway. This way. I had a chance. Eleanor's eyes glistened. And I needed to know something. I needed to know if anyone would speak for me when I was powerless, when I had no voice. Would anyone care enough to see the truth? That homeless man, Margaret said quietly. Isaiah Thompson. He cared. Eleanor nodded, tears spilling. A stranger I'd never met spoke up when everyone else stayed silent, when even my own doctor signed my death certificate without truly checking. Detective Morrison closed her notebook. Mrs. Whitmore, what you did was incredibly dangerous. You could have died. Living with Richard was more dangerous. Eleanor's voice hardened. At least this way, the truth came out. At least this way, he can't hurt anyone else. Across the city, in a gray interrogation room at Charleston Police Department, Richard Caldwell sat in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed to the table. His lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in an expensive suit, sat beside him, whispering urgently. But Richard wasn't listening anymore. Detective Morrison's partner, Detective James Park, sat across from them with a thick file folder. Tell us about the tetrodotoxin, Mr. Caldwell. Richard's lawyer answered. My client has no comment at this time. Detective Park opened the folder, spread out printed screenshots. We found your computer, dark web transactions, forum posts asking about TTX dosage, detection methods, how to avoid autopsy, purchase receipts. You want to explain these? The lawyer whispered again. Richard stared at the table. Dr. Marcus Ashford is talking. Detective Park continued. He's telling us everything. How you blackmailed him about a malpractice case from 2015. How you forced him to sign a false death certificate. How you threatened to destroy his career if he didn't help you murder your wife. Richard's jaw clenched. He's lying. Is he? Detective Park leaned forward. Because we also have recordings from the funeral, Isaiah Thompson's accusation. You didn't deny what he said, you tried to discredit him instead. That's not the response of an innocent man. Silence stretched. Richard's lawyer touched his arm, cautioning. Detective Park's voice softened slightly. Help me understand. Richard, what drives a man to murder his wife, Eleanor Whitmore, was wealthy. Yes, but by all accounts she was also kind, generous. She built free clinics. She helped people. Why did she have to die? Something broke in Richard then. His shoulders shook. Because she had everything, he whispered. And I had nothing. His lawyer grabbed his arm. Richard, don't. But 15 years of pressure, of pretending, of holding himself together through sheer will, collapsed in that moment. Do you know what it's like? His voice rose, cracking. To grow up watching your father hang himself because he couldn't face being poor, to be the kid wearing Goodwill clothes at a prep school full of rich kids, to eat government cheese and dream about having enough. Tears streamed down his face. I worked so hard. Scholarships, student loans. I became a lawyer. But I was still nobody. Still the poor kid pretending to belong. He looked up, eyes hollow. Then I met Eleanor. Beautiful, kind, wealthy Eleanor. And I thought, finally I'll be safe. I'll never end up like my father." Detective Park said nothing, letting Richard talk. But she wouldn't give me control of the company. Said I wasn't ready. Meanwhile, she gave millions to charity, to strangers, to people who'd never appreciate it the way I would. His voice turned bitter. I didn't want to kill her. I just wanted what should have been mine, what I'd earned by playing the devoted husband for 5 years. "So you poisoned her, planned to bury her alive." Richard's whisper was barely audible. "I know what I did. I know what I am." The next morning, Isaiah Thompson visited Eleanor's hospital room. He'd showered at a shelter, trimmed his beard with borrowed scissors, and wore donated clean clothes, simple jeans and a button-down shirt that hung loose on his thin frame. But his eyes, those dark eyes that had seen too much pain, were the same. Margaret answered his knock, immediately pulling him into a hug. "You saved her life. How can we ever thank you?" Isaiah looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. "I just did what anyone should do, ma'am." Eleanor sat up in bed, looking stronger than yesterday. Color had returned to her cheeks. "Mr. Thompson, please, sit." He took the chair beside her bed, perching on its edge like he might need to flee at any moment. "I need to understand something," Eleanor said. "Why did you speak up? Richard was powerful. You're a stranger to me. You risked everything." Isaiah's hands gripped his knees. "Because 15 years ago, I lost my wife and daughter. Car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light." Eleanor's face softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm so sorry." The driver was young, 23, from a wealthy family. His father was a state senator. Isaiah's voice hardened. He got 6 months in county jail, out in 3 for good behavior. His lawyers made sure of it. Tears welled in his eyes. "I sat in that courtroom watching justice fail. I was too broken to speak, too defeated to fight. That silence has haunted me for 15 years. He looked at Eleanor directly. "So, when I heard Richard planning to bury you alive, I couldn't be silent again. I couldn't let another person die when I had the power to speak." Eleanor reached for his hand. "What was the driver's name?" Isaiah's voice went flat. "Richard Caldwell." The room froze. Eleanor's face drained of color. Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Isaiah looked up, saw their expressions. "Wait. You didn't know?" Eleanor's whisper was broken. "He never told me. He said his past was difficult. But he never—" She stared at Isaiah, horror and understanding dawning. "You saved the wife of the man who killed your family." Isaiah stood abruptly, backing toward the door. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come. I should have—" "No." Eleanor's voice rang with steel. "Don't you dare apologize. Sit down." He hesitated, then slowly returned to the chair. Eleanor's voice shook. "You saved me knowing what Richard did to you. I didn't save his wife," Isaiah said quietly. "I saved you. You're not responsible for his sins. You're your own person." Long silence filled the room. Outside, hospital sounds continued: footsteps, beeping monitors, distant conversations. But in this room, 3 people sat with the weight of impossible truth. Margaret finally spoke. The drunk driver who killed your family became Eleanor's husband, and you saved her anyway. Isaiah nodded. I couldn't save Sarah and Grace. I couldn't get justice for them. The system failed us because we didn't have money or power. His voice strengthened. But I could save you, Mrs. Whitmore. I could speak up this time, and maybe that makes up for staying silent before. Eleanor was crying now, not from her ordeal, but from the profound weight of what Isaiah had done. You didn't just save my life. You showed me that goodness still exists in this world. She wiped her eyes. Isaiah, I need to tell you something. Something about why I married Richard in the first place. She took a breath. And something about the plan I made that brought us all to that cemetery. Margaret brought the blue box from Eleanor's study. The USB drive inside contained the truth Eleanor had been hiding not just from Richard, but from everyone. As they watched the video Eleanor had recorded weeks before her death, Isaiah's understanding of what had happened shifted completely. Eleanor hadn't been just a victim. She'd been an architect of her own near death, gambling everything on a desperate hope that someone somewhere would care enough to speak up. And Isaiah had been that someone. You used us, he said slowly when the video ended, not angry, just processing. You manipulated the situation. I did, Eleanor admitted. And I'm sorry for the pain it caused. But Isaiah, Richard was poisoning me anyway. The only difference was whether I controlled it or he did. And I needed to know if my life mattered to anyone beyond my money. She looked at him with tear-filled eyes. You were the answer to that question. You proved that one person with courage matters more than 100 people with comfort. Isaiah sat back, overwhelmed. The woman he'd saved had orchestrated her own near death. The man he'd exposed as a murderer was the same man who'd killed his family. Everything was connected in ways he couldn't have imagined. I don't know how to feel about any of this, he admitted. Neither do I, Eleanor said. But we're alive to figure it out because of you, because of... 6 months after that autumn day in the cemetery, the federal courthouse in Charleston overflowed with spectators. Every seat was taken, every corner packed with people who'd followed the case obsessively. Outside, television vans lined the street, reporters doing live broadcasts. The nation had watched this story unfold, the billionaire who rose from her coffin, the homeless hero, the husband who tried to bury his wife alive. Eleanor sat in the front row, Margaret beside her. She looked different now, thinner, grayer, but somehow stronger. Surviving death had changed her in ways she was still discovering. Isaiah sat 3 rows back, wearing a suit Eleanor had bought him. He'd been living in a small apartment she'd helped him secure, working as a consultant for her company's community outreach programs. The transformation was visible, clean-shaven, healthy weight returning to his frame, but his eyes still carried the weight of 15 years of loss. The prosecutor, a black woman named Angela Washington, stood to address the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about power, greed, and the value we place on human life. Richard Caldwell married Eleanor Whitmore not for love, but for access to her fortune. When she wouldn't surrender control of her company, He decided to take it by force, by murder. She walked to the evidence table, held up a vial. Tetrodotoxin, pharmaceutical grade, purchased by the defendant through dark web channels, a poison so effective it mimics death itself. He put it in his wife's tea. He watched her collapse. He let doctors declare her dead. And he was about to bury her alive when one man, one homeless man everyone else ignored, spoke the truth. No one else would say. The jury, 8 women, 4 men, mixed races and ages, listened intently. Richard sat at the defense table, a shell of the man he'd been. His expensive suit hung loose. His face was gaunt, aged a decade and 6 months. His lawyer, despite her skill, knew this was unwinnable. Too much evidence, too many witnesses. A confession on record. When Isaiah was called to testify, he walked to the stand with quiet dignity. After being sworn in, he sat, hands folded, waiting. Prosecutor Washington approached gently. "Mr. Thompson, can you tell the court what you heard on the night of October 13th? Isaiah's voice was steady. "I was sheltering under the Cooper River Bridge where I've lived for 12 years. Around 11:30 p.m., a black Mercedes pulled up. The driver, Mr. Caldwell, was on a phone call. His window was cracked. I heard him say, 'The TTX worked perfectly. She's cold already. We bury her tomorrow before anyone suspects.' What did you do with that information?" "I went to the library the next morning. I researched tetrodotoxin poisoning. I found information about antidotes. I used the community science lab to prepare a calcium-based solution. Then I walked 8 miles to Magnolia Grove Cemetery." The defense attorney stood a sharp-faced woman in her 40s. "Mr. Thompson, you're homeless. You've been diagnosed with depression. You've admitted to having suicidal thoughts after your family's death. How do we know you didn't hallucinate this conversation?" Isaiah looked at her calmly. "Ma'am, I may have lost my home. I may struggle with grief, but I didn't lose my education. I didn't lose my integrity, and I didn't lose my ability to recognize the truth. You expect this jury to believe a vagrant over a respected businessman. I expect this jury to look at the evidence." Isaiah's voice remained steady. "The tetrodotoxin found in Mr. Caldwell's possession, the dark web transaction records, Dr. Ashford's testimony about being blackmailed, the recorded confession at the cemetery, and then ask themselves, who's telling the truth?" Spontaneous applause broke out in the gallery. The judge gavelled for order, but several jurors were nodding. When Eleanor took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. This was the moment everyone had waited for. Prosecutor Washington asked, "Mrs. Whitmore, when did you first suspect your husband was trying to kill you?" "6 months before my supposed death. I found a receipt for a dark web purchase, tetrodotoxin." "Why didn't you go to the police?" Eleanor looked directly at the jury. "Because I'm a woman accusing her lawyer husband of planning to murder her, without concrete proof. Who would believe me? Richard is brilliant, articulate, convincing. He would have claimed I was paranoid, mentally unstable. My word against his." She paused. "So I did something desperate. I hired a private investigator, gathered evidence, and then I switched Richard's poison with a modified, lower dose. I knew he'd use it in my nightly tea. I gambled that the reduced concentration would slow my vital signs without killing me, and that someone would notice something wrong before they buried me." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. "You intentionally poisoned yourself?" Prosecutor Washington asked, though she knew the answer. "I intentionally controlled how I would be poisoned, because Richard was going to do it anyway." Eleanor's voice strengthened. "And I needed to know if my life mattered to anyone beyond my bank account. If anyone would speak up when I couldn't speak for myself." She looked at Isaiah. He answered that question. The defense tried to spin Eleanor's actions as manipulative, as a rich woman's game that went wrong. But the jury wasn't buying it. The evidence was overwhelming. Richard's own words, recorded at the cemetery, Dr. Ashford's testimony about being blackmailed, the dark web transactions, the vial of tetrodotoxin found in Richard's safe. When the verdict came guilty on all counts of attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud, Richard showed no emotion. He was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. As guards led him away, he looked back once at Eleanor. "I'm sorry," he mouthed. Eleanor said nothing. She had no words left for him. 8 months after the trial, Eleanor hosted a gala at her estate to celebrate the opening of a new community center. The ballroom glowed with candlelight, filled with donors, politicians, and community leaders. But Eleanor had insisted on inviting the people who actually used the center's services, families from the neighborhoods her clinic served, workers from her company, people who would benefit from the job training and medical care the center would provide. Isaiah stood near the windows, uncomfortable in his suit despite wearing it well now. He'd been promoted to Director of Community Outreach at Whitmore Pharmaceuticals, a position that used both his scientific knowledge and his understanding of what it meant to be forgotten by society. The work gave him purpose. More than that, it gave him a way to honor Sarah and Grace's memory by helping others. A woman approached him around 40, black, beautiful, wearing a doctor's white coat over an elegant dress. "Mr. Thompson?" Isaiah turned. "Yes, I'm Dr. Grace Williams. I'm the lead physician at the new North Charleston Clinic. Mrs. Whitmore just opened." Isaiah smiled politely. "Grace, that's a lovely name. That was my daughter's name." The woman's hand trembled slightly as she held out a small object. "I know. That's why I needed to talk to you." Isaiah looked down. In her palm lay a child's bracelet, tarnished silver, clearly old, with a name engraved on it in careful letters. "Grace." The room tilted. Isaiah's hand shot out to grip the window frame. "Where did you get that?" "You gave it to me for my 8th birthday, the day before the accident." Isaiah's voice failed completely. He just stared at the bracelet, the one he'd saved for 2 months to buy, the one Grace had worn constantly, the one that should have been buried with her body. Dr. Grace Williams' eyes filled with tears. "Daddy, I didn't die." The word "daddy" broke something in Isaiah. He stumbled backward, sitting heavily in a nearby chair. "That's not possible. They told me the hospital said—" Grace knelt in front of him, still holding the bracelet. "I was in a coma for 3 months. Severe head trauma. By the time I woke up, you'd already been committed to psychiatric care. You'd tried to end your life after Mom died. The doctors thought—" Her voice cracked. "They thought it was better to let you believe I was gone too." Isaiah couldn't breathe. "No, No, they wouldn't. I was adopted, grew up as Grace Williams. I had memory loss from the injury. Everything before the accident was just fragments. A man's laugh, a song about sunshine, the word NASA. She took his hand, pressed the bracelet into it. When I saw your photo after the trial, something clicked. I hired a detective. We did a DNA test. She pulled papers from her purse with shaking hands. It's really me, Daddy, your baby girl. I'm alive. Isaiah stared at the papers without seeing them. His brain couldn't process this. Grace was dead. He'd mourned her for 15 years. He'd sung to her ghost every night under that bridge. She couldn't be. Then Grace began to sing, her voice soft and breaking. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Isaiah's voice joined hers automatically, muscle memory from 1,000 bedtimes. You make me happy when skies are gray. And suddenly, he was sobbing, pulling this woman, this stranger who was his daughter, into his arms. They collapsed together on the floor of Eleanor's ballroom, crying so hard they couldn't breathe, holding each other like they might disappear if they let go. You're alive, Isaiah kept saying. You're alive. Oh God, you're alive. I'm here. Daddy, I'm here. Across the room, Eleanor watched through her own tears. Margaret stood beside her, tissues pressed to her eyes. He's saved your life, Margaret whispered. And in doing that, he found his daughter. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. The symmetry of it was almost too much to bear. Isaiah had lost everything to a drunk driver named Richard Caldwell, had spent 15 years in grief and homelessness, had spoken up at her funeral when no one else would, and that act of courage, that refusal to stay silent, had led him here, to this moment, to his daughter, alive and grown and standing before him. From ashes to dawn, Eleanor finally managed to say. Margaret squeezed her hand. From ashes to dawn. 2 years after that autumn funeral, Charleston Public Library opened a new wing on a warm spring morning. The Isaiah Thompson Reading Room gleamed with fresh paint and possibility computers for job searches, a small science lab, study desks, and shelves full of books on every subject imaginable. A bronze plaque beside the entrance read, "He saw what others missed. He spoke when others stayed silent. He saved a life because he refused to be invisible." Isaiah stood at the podium, 60 years old now, healthy and strong in ways he'd forgotten were possible. His daughter Grace sat in the front row beside her twin daughters, his granddaughters, 12 and 10 years old, whom he'd never known existed until 2 years ago. Eleanor and her husband Thomas sat nearby, their adopted son Marcus between them. Margaret, now 87 but sharp as ever, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. 2 years ago, Isaiah began, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed room. I slept under a bridge. People walked past me every day like I was invisible, like I didn't exist. He paused. But I saw something. I heard something. And I made a choice to speak instead of stay silent, to act instead of walk away. He looked at the diverse crowd before him, homeless individuals in donated clothes sitting beside wealthy donors in designer suits, black and white and brown faces, young and old. This room isn't named after me because I'm a hero. It's named after me because I'm proof. Proof that your circumstances don't define your worth. Proof that one voice can change everything. Proof that it's never too late to do the right thing." His voice strengthened. "Some of you are where I was living, rough, feeling invisible, wondering if your life matters. I'm here to tell you it does. You matter. Your voice matters. Even when the world tries to silence you, speak anyway." The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Afterward, Eleanor found him by the window, watching his granddaughters explore the science lab. "They're beautiful," she said softly. Isaiah smiled. "Grace is teaching them to question everything, to speak up when something's wrong, to never let anyone make them feel invisible." She learned from the best. Eleanor touched his arm. "Isaiah, I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "Forgiveness." She looked out at the spring sunshine. "I've been writing to Richard. In prison. Not often, maybe once a month. He writes back. His letters have changed. At first, they were full of excuses. But lately—" She trailed off. Lately. They sound like a man who actually understands what he did, who's genuinely trying to become better." She turned to face him. "I'm thinking about visiting him." Isaiah was quiet for a long moment. "The man who tried to kill you. The man who killed my family." "Yes." But why? Eleanor's eyes were clear. "Because holding on to hatred is like drinking poison and expecting him to die. Forgiveness isn't about letting him off the hook he's in prison for life. It's about letting myself be free." Isaiah thought about Sarah and Grace, his first Grace, the 8-year-old who'd died in that crash. He'd carried rage against Richard Caldwell for 15 years. It had poisoned everything, driven him to the bridge, nearly destroyed him. But speaking up at Eleanor's funeral, saving her life, despite who her husband was, that had started to heal something he'd thought was permanently broken. "I think," he said slowly, "that's one of the bravest things I've heard." That afternoon, they drove to Magnolia Grove Cemetery together, Isaiah, Eleanor, Thomas, Grace and her daughters, Margaret, and young Marcus. The cemetery looked different in spring than it had that desperate autumn day. Magnolia trees bloomed white and pink, grass grew thick and green, life everywhere. A new bench sat where Eleanor's casket had almost been lowered into the ground. Dark wood, elegant but sturdy, with a brass plaque. Here. Death was stopped by a voice. Here. Silence was broken by courage. Here. Life defeated lies. In memory of all who speak up when others stay silent. They sat together, this unlikely family bound not by blood but by trauma, transformed into love. Isaiah held his granddaughter's hand. Eleanor leaned against Thomas. Margaret sat between them all, the matriarch who'd refused to stay silent when it mattered most. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd stayed quiet that day?" Eleanor asked Isaiah. "Every day," he admitted. "Because I stayed quiet once before. When Richard killed my family, I didn't fight, didn't demand justice. I just broke. You were grieving. I was afraid I didn't matter enough for anyone to listen. He looked at the bench, the plaque. "But that day at your funeral, I got a second chance. A chance to matter, to speak, to save someone." Young Marcus, 7 years old, looked up at Isaiah with curious eyes. "Mr. Isaiah, were you scared when you ran to save Miss Eleanor?" Isaiah knelt to the boy's level, terrified. "But I learned something important. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being more afraid of staying silent than speaking up." Marcus thought about this seriously. "I'm going to remember that." "Good," Isaiah said, "because the world needs people who speak up, especially for those who can't speak for themselves." As the sun lowered toward the horizon, painting the cemetery in gold, they stood to leave. But Eleanor paused at the bench, reading the inscription one more time. "From ashes to dawn," she said softly. "That's what we did. Isn't it? All of us?" Isaiah stood beside her. "We did it together. You showed me my life still had purpose. I showed you that goodness still exists. Grace gave me back my daughter. You gave me back my dignity." Margaret showed us that age doesn't diminish courage. He looked at his family. The words still felt miraculous gathered around this bench that marked where death had tried to win and failed. "Maybe that's what love does," Grace said, joining them. "It doesn't erase the ashes. It doesn't pretend the pain never happened. It just walks with us from darkness into light." They left together as the sun set, their shadows stretching long across the grass. Behind them, the bench remained a testament to the day one man's voice had changed everything, a reminder that every life matters, that silence has a cost, that speaking up, even when you're afraid, especially when you're afraid, can save the world. And in the distance, where highway met horizon, a black car carried someone else toward redemption. Richard Caldwell, transported from prison for a medical appointment, looked out the window at the setting sun and thought about the letters Eleanor had sent him, about second chances, about whether a man who'd become a monster could find his way back to human. The answer, he was learning, was yes, but only if he chose every day to try. From ashes to dawn, for all of them, together. This story reminds us that our voice matters most when we feel most invisible. Isaiah Thompson had every reason to stay silent. Society had dismissed him. Tragedy had broken him. And 15 years of homelessness had taught him that people like him weren't heard. Yet he spoke anyway. He walked 8 miles to speak up for a stranger because he refused to let silence win twice. And in that moment of courage, he didn't just save Eleanor's life, he reclaimed his own. He found his daughter. He discovered that his years of pain weren't wasted. They were preparation for the moment when someone else needed exactly what he had to give. This is the truth we all need to hear. It's never too late to matter. Your circumstances don't define your worth. The wisdom you've gained, the losses you've survived, the quiet strength you've built, these make you exactly who someone else needs. You are not invisible. Your voice carries weight. Your courage inspires others. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is refuse to stay silent when every part of you wants to disappear. What moment in your life required you to speak up when it felt impossible? If you could go back and tell your younger self one truth about their worth, What would it be? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. This story reminds us that our voice matters most when we feel most invisible. Isaiah Thompson had every reason to stay silent. Society had dismissed him. Tragedy had broken him. And 15 years of homelessness had taught him that people like him weren't heard. Yet he spoke anyway. He walked 8 miles to speak up for a stranger because he refused to let silence win twice. And in that moment of courage, he didn't just save Eleanor's life, he reclaimed his own. He found his daughter. He discovered that his years of pain weren't wasted. They were preparation for the moment when someone else needed exactly what he had to give. This is the truth we all need to hear. It's never too late to matter. Your circumstances don't define your worth. The wisdom you've gained, the losses you've survived, the quiet strength you've built, these make you exactly who someone else needs. You are not invisible. Your voice carries weight. Your courage inspires others. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is refuse to stay silent when every part of you wants to disappear. What moment in your life required you to speak up when it felt impossible? If you could go back and tell your younger self one truth about their worth, what would it be? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.